the network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
This is AV.
This
is AV Nation.
This is AV Nation.
Welcome to Alive Life. My name is Christian Samuelson. This is a production of AV Nation, and my illustrious producer, Mr. Tucker.
Hey everybody, how are you? Good to be on the air again.
We talk about a lot of things on this show, from live production, sound, audio, lighting, everything you can imagine. But today, it's tax season, and today we're talking about taxes, the dreaded taxes.
Womp womp.
The IRS wants our pound of flesh, and Rob Good, he is the owner of Kinvat Incorporated, which is a labor company, is here to guide us through some of the toils and tribulations a freelancer goes through when he typically deals with tax season. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Rob?
Thanks, Christian, and thanks both of you for having me tonight. It's really kind of fun. I don't get to do this very often, tucked out here. Well, as you said, I run a labor service. I was just talking with George earlier. We've recently gone national. So, basically anywhere in town you need us, we send the best guys we can. In just about all aspects, from your basic AV breakout rooms to your large-scale productions, corporate rock and roll, the whole deal. And I just personally went through a hell of a nasty tax season. I don't know about you guys, but it doesn't mean it's any easier on the side of being a business owner, I'll tell you that. Just more complicated.
Well, what comes to mind, Rob, being a freelancer in this business many years ago, I would go try to figure it out on my own with half a dozen W-2s and a dozen or 2 dozen 1099s and try to make heads or tails of it. And my accountant always said, well, you should have organized it in such a way. Maybe you should incorporate. A lot of different advice from a lot of different people, and early on I didn't know what to do. What's some advice that you could give a freelancer about how to organize himself so that he takes full advantages of what he could take from the tax code and prepare and save? Perhaps if he's got 1099s, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I could go all night, frankly, because as if I was a freelancer myself for a good 10, 12 years, just out there in the wind, just like we all were, and dealt with those very same issues. And one day I took the advice of someone who said you should incorporate and get an accountant and start organizing, and so that's what I did. And that would be my advice to most guys, at the very least. And I don't know how, there's a lot of high-end technical stuff you guys talk about, but a lot of the guys I deal with are your basic stagehands. And, we've got the whole echelon, the whole hierarchy of folks that work in our industry, but a lot of the foot soldiers out there are these guys, and they just don't have a clue in a lot of cases, and they're not taking any preparation. What I try to tell them is some of them don't even have bank accounts. They'll go and because one day they went and they got a bank account, got a bunch of fees, got a negative, and then they go and they just go off grid, monetarily speaking. And there's no organization to it, there's no tracking to it, but they had to give their information to their employers, and they're going to get a 1099 or a W-2, and they're not going to know what to do with it. So my first bit of advice would be to get yourself a documented situation. Get yourself a bank account, get yourself a separate bank account if you can, that you do all your business transactions on. It doesn't cost that much more to set up another account if you've already got an account with the bank. And that was one of the first things I did when I started the beginnings of this business was, well, what do you have to do? You have to set up a different account. You got to keep the stuff separate. from your very personal day-to-day stuff. So those are the main things. Get yourself an account, get yourself a separate account, document everything, get a calendar to document everything, not just your gigs, but also expenses. Include that in your calendar protocol, if you will, so you can go through it later. The very last and most important bit of advice, get an accountant. Don't wait till the end of the year and go to H&R Block. They charge you by the form, by the way. That's one of the biggest mistakes. They walk in with a stack of who knows what where. They don't know what to do with it. So get an accountant. Just get an accountant. Get an accountant.
I want to ask a question real quick because you start off this conversation by saying two things: incorporate and get your own bank account or two bank accounts. So I know
Yes.
I've dealt with the guys who they're the guys in the field. They just do it. They just do it. They just do it. And a bank account is really the only place where they just cash a check and get money.
Right.
So we're talking about incorporating, even though you're an individual freelancer. I mean, are we going to that guy that does the online thing and says, I forget what that company's called, all the ads on TV about, get your incorporation, make a will, or is there something more to that? Two bank accounts. Is one a business account? Does it have to be a business account, or how do I separate that?
It's well, I wouldn't. When I say incorporate, some of the notes that we've been looking at here mention the idea of an LLC versus a sole proprietorship as far as these terms go. Frankly, it's hard to tell the difference. What you do is you pick one and you get it, basically. If you for a single sole proprietor, a guy that is literally just a freelancer, let's say I'm a lighting tech, and all I do is lighting, and people hire me to go do lighting for them. Some of them are W-2s, some of them are 1099s. What I would do is set up an LLC or a sole proprietorship for the business I do 1099 wise, and then if I have to do it W-2 with my person, I could, but I'm not sure about this legally, but I don't know if you can W-2 as an LLC. I don't think it works that way because it has to be one or the other. Is that not correct? I'm not an expert. I'm only have learned over the last few years what my accountants have been teaching me on now a different level, because I've kind of skipped ahead past the how do you deal with it as a freelancer. I basically almost didn't deal with it and then fixed it and got myself right. The way I saved myself was by incorporating and getting to clean my situation up and fully separate my personal from a business. And it was especially important to do that when the business was doing the kind of volume we're doing now. It would be ridiculous if I were doing this on a personal level. It would just be a bloody mess. So I don't know if that answers your question at all.
Well, I know that personally I've had both kinds of employees. I've had W-2s and 1099s under an LLC, and the reason that people chose to be a 1099 was largely personal. They had their own insurance. They had their own liability insurance. They didn't want me to take out taxes for whatever reason, and they were an at-will employee, which, I looked very hard at the code which defined what a 1099 employee is, and it's somebody, you can't tell them where to be and what to do, where and accept the job, and if they do it, you pay them. It's like a contract employee, which is, a substantial difference from somebody who's on a W-2, and you say you have to be there at 9 o'clock in the morning, and if you're not there, you're fired. But I wanted to get into, what are some of the tax advantages that a freelancer could take care of or take advantage of if, they're a 1099 employee? Couldn't they take more advantage of some of those tax benefits if they were incorporated?
If you're asking me, I would say the answer is yes from my own experience. Because, and this is a lot of ins and outs that, again, my accountant handles for me, and that's why I'm sitting here happy and unstressed about what just happened the last couple of weeks over tax week, because I pay small mom and pop firm up the road in Clendenin to take care of this, and they email me every day with questions, and I get on the phone with them, and it's a few minutes out of my day and digging around in the documents that I've managed to keep, and that's it, and it's all taken care of, and I get a bill, and it's infinitely easier. And I always notice that once I've done this, the tax liability of my company, and then splitting it between me being my own salaried employee and the company seems to break even. We barely get hit with taxes, yet the volume of my company is, of course, much more than I pay myself a salary. I pay myself a very moderate, below the radar, below the, as little tax liability salary as I can budgetly allow for my personal business, and the company pays for as many things that are legally deductible, which is a lot more things than if you were just a person. They get really strict with an individual, but a company has a certain budget limit every year or every week or month or whatever of how many times you can take someone out to dinner and stuff like that. So there's a lot of little breaks and things that are just get thrown into a category of a company write-off that I could never have even thought of writing off of as a person. So there's that.
Okay, now just as a freelancer, if I was, going to my accountant with my stacks of paperwork, what sort of receipt should I that would be deductible for me? What would you tell them, or what are some of those things that the freelancer should keep track of so that they can take that to their accountant?
Well, basically anything that you can say you use for your work, any tools that you purchase for your work, obviously, any vehicular usage, meaning mileage, buying even gear for your car, because I think you can take miles and gas off your deduct from your taxes as an individual. And I'm not, again, do not quote me. I'm no expert. I'm in the hands of folks who know better. But I've noticed that that's one of the major things you can do as an individual. Even things like clothing and gear and shoes, things people don't think about all the time. But if you're on the floor of that ballroom and you're cutting through your New Balance, that's your work. You spent that for work, so you can deduct that. You can work off, and it's not the same write-off level as you can get with other things and other incorporated bodies, but it's something to think about, which is why you should have an account. The whole idea is to get the stuff documented so you don't have to write this stuff down and keep receipts. If you keep it all on one account and you can literally go in and go, oh, that purchase at the Craftsman for the box wrenches, definitely a write-off.
Well, I know
so
that
it's just easy to track.
I know that personally, I buy a lot of stuff for my business from Home Depot, right? So set up so
we all
that
do.
When I swipe my business debit card, it automatically emails a receipt to accounting@crosspointav.com. So I can throw that receipt away because I know that it's in a safe place. It's going somewhere, and that's just something that I do because I'm horrible with receipts. My account's constantly hounding me for, where's this receipt? Where's that receipt? Well, I don't know. I lost it. It's in my wallet. It's at the bottom of the car. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a little tip that's saved me a little bit.
If I can ask a question then, how do you gentlemen, and I'll start with Rob, how do you gentlemen document your receipts? What's the best methodology? Are you scanning them in using that little scanner for documents? Are you writing it down in a notebook only? That's the freelancer and the live guy's problem. We're everywhere, and we're working 48-hour shifts, and we're working days to days to days to days, and never taking a day off, because the minute you take a day off is the minute you don't get paid.
Yeah.
So, Rob, how do you document everything that you have so that it's available to you?
That's a great question, and this is something that I wish I had done more as a freelancer. I wouldn't have, dug a bit of a hole for myself that I'm in the middle of fixing. But the way I do it now, and the way I avoid having to scan receipts or keep crumpled pieces of paper in my wallet after 47 hours in the ballroom, you're never going to be able to keep track of it that way. What I do now is I have Quicken, and I have all of my accounts that have a card attached to it linked to Quicken. Anytime that I make a purchase, whether it's with my personal card or my business card, it's logged into Quicken, and it has a brief little prefix, and it lets you know what it is and the basic type of charge it is. And it's very easy to break them down, and I literally just zip my Quicken file, send it over to the accountant, and if they have any questions about a weird abbreviated prefix, like what's this ESH protect? Oh, that's my phone insurance for my business cell phone. Okay. Now they know that every $25 a month charge from that account is, and that's all I had to do was remember what that was. I didn't have to take any receipts down because it's all taking advantage of the information age. We don't need paper anymore. Get it in a program, just like you said, Christian. It emails your receipt right to your accountant. It sets it, it's already locked in. So use programs. Use something like Quicken. Use something you're comfortable with. Doesn't have to be Quicken. Some people hate it. But use something that keeps everything for you, and use plastic as much as possible. Avoid cash, and if you do cash, make a note of it, because that's where you get a lot of gaps, is pulling cash out.
Yeah,
that's where I don't have it.
I know that gets messy. The only time that I ever pull cash out for the business is for per diems.
Precisely, and that's, I've got a petty cash allowance in my situation where, they will ask me, oh, what was this? Oh, well, I had a huge gig at the Marriott Marquis. I had 10 guys come at the last minute. I had to give them all parking money as a little thank you for showing up last minute and tipping that truck that came out of nowhere. It happens. So, but you have to, that's where I make a note of it. I put it in my job book file. Keep documentation. Again, that's what I'll say over and over again during this little show is, for this subject, the only thing is document. Because if you can't find it, it's never going to help you, right? Put it down somewhere.
Sorry, I'm flipping between cameras here. I have a question, though. So a lot of guys will still try to write it down in a notebook. Are you saying, though, that the best, like Christian said, is a sort of cloud-based system? On your smartphone, just enter it and you're done, right? I mean, you don't want to lose that notebook.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've got, for a long time, my accountant made me enter a purchase order for everything that I purchased everywhere, Amazon.com, eBay.com, everything, and it was a hassle, but it got me into the habit of saving receipts and keeping track of those receipts so that they could all be expensed at the end of the year. Now, if I'm mobile, I've got an app on my phone called Cam Scanner. So I just snap a picture of the receipt, it turns it into a PDF, and I email it to myself, and I can throw it away. And then I can go back and search for all of those particular receipts in my email inbox and print them all out and give them to the accountant and be done with it. I wanted to ask you something else, Rob. What are, in your options that freelancers have about deduct?
You slipped out on audio on most of that.
What are some of the misconceptions that freelancers have about the IRS and what they can or can't deduct?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. What are the misconceptions? What do they think they can... Well, here's an interesting thing that I learned. Not every meal you ever eat is something you can deduct. People have spread a rumor that if you're at a gig and you go to lunch, you can write that off. But technically, the rule on that is it has to be a meal you've eaten on an overnight stay on business. And so you have to be permanently sort of away from your home, so you couldn't conceivably go to your home and eat a meal you've already purchased. And that's a very fine line, and frankly, I don't know how often that comes up, but if it got audited and some IRS guy had a real big one for you, it would come up.
Well, for those of
so
us
there's
who live
one.
in
That's
West
a rather
Virginia,
scary thing.
those of us who live in West Virginia and travel to D.C., and if we are working in D.C., we request that our prime contractor get us a hotel for the night, then we're usually in pretty good shape.
That's
But,
right. That's right. I'm mostly talking about the grubby pirates that I work with in the larger majority here. You know, I've got plenty of techs and A1s and V1s and wonderful guys like you, Christian, that I work with, but a lot of these guys are scrubbing across town for the day to fill a call, and it's a one-off, and they're there for load in, they're coming back for load out, and they think they're going to go get the nice lunch because it's all write-off. Well, it's not really. It's not really.
But
Now
it's a funny thing. I'm sorry to interject, Christian.
Go ahead.
I work in New York, and New York is a vast area. And when I lived in Brooklyn, if you were in Manhattan and they gave you an hour lunch, a lot of times they would look at you and go, "There was ample time to go home," so you couldn't write it off. It was a real problem because they didn't understand. Sometimes errors go, "You got the subway. It's fine. You could have gotten home. No write-off."
Yeah, that's an interesting gray area, you know, which is why it's very good to be a W-2 guy up there in New York.
I wanted to ask you, last time that I worked for you, which was several years ago, it was as Crosspoint LLC. You wrote the check to Crosspoint LLC, and you didn't charge me a fee for using your liability insurance. Now, as a freelancer who's personally incorporated and works for you often, how soon do you think his premium would pay for itself versus deductions you were taking from using your liability insurance?
You're asking me that, Christian? I didn't get the beginning of the intro to the question, but
I
is that
suppose
for me?
I suppose that's a matter of time and conjecture. But if I'm a 1099 employee, I'm technically required liability insurance, and if I don't have liability insurance, you or other labor companies typically charge me a fee for using yours.
Yes, yes, that is correct. And what I have been doing, because I have taken it upon myself for the last couple years, I have actually, those that are insured make a point of doing so and telling me, and I collect their COI, and it does take off from my premium, but the vast majority of them are generally going to be uninsured. And so what I've done is I've covered my own butt, and I've taken out a policy that covers the people that I am hiring based on the amount of miscellaneous income I'm sending to each contractor en masse. So I have a very traditionally very expensive insurance bill. It's one of my only large costs of doing business, because otherwise it's mostly software and using information tech here, and just being a brain and knowing people and knowing how to do what I do, which is a very specific thing. So, you know, that's what I'd say to that. I mean, does that make sense?
It does make sense, and I know that a good percentage of my liability insurance is written off at the end of the year as a business expense.
Yes.
Now,
which is why it doesn't bother me.
my question is wouldn't that be a smart move for a freelancer to get their liability insurance personally, knowing that they can write it off
Yes, and
liability insurance?
yes.
That's
Now,
where that question was really leading to. Sorry, it was a
yes.
long-winded way around to get there, but
yes, the answer to the question for that is yes, absolutely, Christian. Every 1099 contractor should get their own liability insurance. When I was a freelancer, I got mine. I think it was what's this typical, like $1 to $2 million aggregate, or $4 million aggregate liability, meaning if a $4 million rig fell out of the ceiling and it was my fault, I can cover it, whatever that means in the insurance world. Everyone should get that, because you don't know, once you go freelance, you don't know who you're going to encounter. You need to be insured just in case anything happens, first of all. And yes, it is a deduction. Sometimes you're talking about $400 a year, so it's not a huge deduction, but it is something, you know. I think, frankly, what I want to do in the next, instead of, one of my major competitors in DC, he hires all 1099, but he charges his folks a 2% insurance fee for covering them if they don't present him with their COI. So I'm thinking about following suit, frankly, because it's very expensive, and I'm trying to lower my overhead and simplify and streamline my situation. I may go ahead and ask that everyone go out there, get your own liability. It's only a few $100 a year. You work for a whole bunch of other people that this will be. It's also a selling point for you as a freelancer. From my point of view, when a freelancer comes to me and he sends me his W-9 and he sends me a COI and he has a nice logo on his email and he looks like he's got it together, he's someone I'm going to trust more quickly and someone that I can safely assume pretty much has their shit together,
I have a quick question.
Are we allowed to cuss? We didn't go over that.
That's all right. All right. I have a question about that though. So I've never been a freelancer. I've always been a staff guy, right? So if a rig fails and falls to the ground because I didn't do it right, even though I'm hired by you, does that mean that I'm liable? I've never actually asked this question, so I'm curious.
If you're a 1099 employee, you're personally liable for everything that you do.
Interesting.
Wow. Now that, if there's any takeaway tonight that any of those guys hear out there, that's it. That is true, and it is a thought that most people don't have and would be frightened to, which is probably why they don't realize it. Luckily, I've never seen anyone do anything dangerous in front of me. I've had very, very good luck because I hire professional, safety-oriented people. But we all hear the stories out there, and it's basically just like the car accident. It goes all the way down the line till the first guy that at the end is the one who takes the hit. So yeah, you are absolutely liable for what you physically do and touch and install and operate as a freelancer, and that's something there's a lot of gravity to that statement that most of those guys out there don't quite realize. So yes, get insurance now.
Well, if there is hidden on the show floor or whatever, whoever's affected is going to fire a shotgun lawsuit that covers everybody from the bottom to the top, and the chips are going to fall where they may, and that's going to be the lowest common denominator and the most open people in court, that are most open
The
to
easiest
liability,
target.
are the easiest target. Yeah, definitely. So I mean, part of the reason that I incorporated was to have that separation of business versus personal, so that if something goes south, they can sue the business, but they can't take my house.
Exactly. Well, I did it for the exact same reasons, Christian. Other than the fact that I was looking at a business that had enough volume that it scared me to want to, again, have it attached to my person. The whole idea is that it's this other thing, and it's a huge debate. We're all talking about corporate personhood. Well, and I understand, the really negative impacts of a huge corporation achieving personhood, because not every person is a good person, and it doesn't seem like most corporations are good people. But if you're a small corporation and you are a good person, you can run good business and be protected, because it's Kinvat. Oh, that Kinvat bought that, or the business did this. This was a purchase for that. It makes your life simpler. It's worth doing, and it's not that much more expensive to incorporate than it is to get an LLC or a sole proprietorship. Just sit down with an accountant.
There's a lot of gray, and there's a lot of things that are acceptable practice and some things that are questionable. How do you stay in the good graces of the IRS without raising suspicion about practices or principles? You don't want to walk the tightrope and pay the tax man too much, but you don't want to rob the IRS either and raise suspicion. That is a gray area. What are your thoughts about the gray area of the tax code where you may think one way and may think another. You have to make a decision about something.
Mm. Well, that's a toughie. I mean, I think the first thing to do is to, again, get an accountant and ask them. It was funny when I went through, reorganizing. I'm sorry, my lighting went out there. When we went through this past year, from me picking up from losing an accountant and having to pick up a new accountant firm, they would send me these breakdowns of my P&L every quarter or every month or whatever it was, and there was a category at the bottom that said "Ask my accountant." It's literally a tagline in the software. It says it's a whole category. Ask my accountant. If you don't know, ask. Get someone who knows and ask them. It's worth the money. If it's especially, in my advice, especially with accountants, is go with a small firm or an individual that doesn't seem overwhelmed and seems to communicate well. Even if they don't understand our business, numbers are numbers and ins and outs are still ins and outs. There will be some explaining to do about how our business works and how that works. But that's, the whole gray area thing. If you're in question, ask an expert. Look it up. Don't make the move without doing some research. What do we all have Google now? Lordy.
I take issue with one thing you just said, Rob.
Okay.
That is the accountant doesn't need to know the freelancer's business. Now, that burned me in the past because a accountant grossly misunderstood what it was that I did and how I did it, and didn't offer me the right advice and the right things that I should do, and I ended up paying a whole lot of money. Now, 2 years later, whoa, you overpaid by quite a bit. We need to refile these last couple of years.
Yeah. Been there. I went through the exact same thing with one of the first firms that I went through. They were a little larger box kind of a scenario, and they didn't understand my business, and I was just, help me, I need an accountant, I don't know what I'm doing. And I went through a very similar experience. You're right, Christian, I should qualify that statement. It's not that the accountant doesn't need to know our business. What you need to do is take it upon yourself to explain the business to them. It may be a difficult explanation, because just telling someone that you spent 48 hours straight standing in a hotel ballroom makes most people look at you like you have 3 heads. But if you can take the time to kind of walk them through what you do on a day, and how you use tools and equipment, and go to seminars and go to hog school and all these things that, oh, well, that was for your work, right? The hog school, what's that? Oh, I learned how to use a console. It cost me like $800 for a weekend, but now I'm getting all these gigs as a big time guy, and now I'm in tax trouble because I just made $40K more than I thought I would, and what do? There you go. So you're right. I take it back. They do need to know what you do for a living. They won't always know, and you have to show them. I haven't been able to find an entertainment style tax accountant guy that doesn't cost an arm and a leg yet. What I do is I work with a small firm, and I sit them down and I tell them a really cool story about the time I got to hang out with Aerosmith in Fort Worth, and they start to understand.
Right. That's good questions. Looks like we're going to be wrapping up here soon.
All right. I have a really interesting theory that I was thinking about I'd like to share involving 1099 and taxes.
Go ahead.
Well, every year I have a certain amount of contractors that I hire that made no more or less than $600 from my entity. They did like a one-day stagehand setup. I paid them $250 and then never saw them again. I do not declare them to the IRS. They do not get a 1099 from me unless they made more than $600.
Right, yeah.
So here's a really weird question. If you worked for 100 companies and you only made $600 from them, could you walk away with a nice year's salary and not have to declare anything?
That's possible.
Because who's tracking it? Is that a loophole? Is the NSA around? I don't know if we should send that out on the final broadcast, guys. We may
It sounds like a lot of work to work for 100 different companies for $600 a piece.
Don't you feel like you have sometimes, though?
It feels like I have. I know that during the '96 Olympics in Atlanta, that the following year in '97, I went to the accountant with 33 W-2s and 1099s.
Woo! Oh, man. As we say out here in West Virginia, well, that's a stack to take to the outhouse.
That's right. Well, on that note, it looks like we're going to be wrapping things up on this tax season's edition of the Live Life IRS tax season. What should the freelancer do? And joining us and giving us a lot of great advice is Rob Good, the owner of Kinvat. And I'd like to thank you for being here tonight, Rob. Any final thoughts?
Thank you guys for having me on. I'd much like to come back on a much more interesting subject than this. Please. But yeah, no, I had a great time. I really appreciate it. I didn't ever set you guys up with my email, but if you need to do any promo stuff, you know where my main email is. If anyone wants to hook up with me out there in the world.
I know that I can for Rob Good and Kinvat. I've known him for a number of years and worked for him, so and he does pay on time. If you're looking for a company to freelance for and you're in the D.C., Maryland area, Kinvat's the way to go. But they've gone nationwide now, so you can reach them on a number of different levels in a number of different cities. Any final thoughts, George?
Document. That's what I get from this. Document everything, find a way to do it, and hire a good accountant. I know I have. You need to do, like you said, early on you said don't hire H&R Block. I know. And even though I've never been a freelancer, yeah, don't hire them. Document, find a good firm. I'm with you with the small mom and pop. They'll work with you and they'll make it work. So, but thank you. Very good advice, Rob. I love hearing about it, and the whole incorporating thing, that's new to me, and I'm going to really look into that for what I do, too.
Right on, George. Thanks again.
Thank you very much once again, Rob Good, for joining us this evening, and thank you, George Tucker, for your input as well. This has been a production of AV Nation. You're listening to the Live Life Tax Edition. Thank you very much.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
This is AV.
This
is AV Nation.
This is AV Nation.